Shadow Business and Trade Secretary in the form of Jonathan Reynolds is here this morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
Where do we start?
Well,
with the Home Secretary. What is that about?
It's just genuinely out of control. But it's irresponsible, it's divisive, and fundamentally, it's so obvious what is going on here. This is a person who is completely driven by their own agenda, their own ambition. We know that. It's not a surprise there, as you say. But where is the Prime Minister in this? Do we believe the Prime Minister signed off that kind of inflammatory rhetoric?
We don't know. We've asked.
Well, he won't tell us. But why is he really too weak to sack his Home Secretary? I mean, that's the question we've got to ask. And I'll just say, look, in all of this is a difficult time in lots of different ways. Surely the job of Home Secretary, the job of protecting the public, is one that demands respect, public service, not undermining the police, they've got enough on, not undermining their operational independence. I just cannot believe, and we have to find out today from the Prime Minister, did he sign off, did he agree to this? And if not, is he too weak to sack her?
Well, good luck with that, rather, because we have been trying. But, you know, in all seriousness, perception is reality. She does, her views mirror quite a lot of the British public.
Well, I would disagree with that. I don't think there's any substance to Suella Braverman other than her own ambition. I think she'd trample over any principle or person in the pursuit of her own ambitions. But I think, you know, if we look specifically at what we're talking about this weekend, I mean, look, for me, Remembrance Sunday, the activities of this weekend are sacrosanct. You know, I will be leading in Hyde and Staley Bridge, which I represent, our remembrance services. We'll do a parade, we have our brass bands there. It's a hugely important part of what we do. But of course, where the police say they can manage other activity in a way which will not interfere in those incredibly important services and activities, surely you've got to respect the operational independence of the police. They've got enough to do. It's a difficult job, rather than undermine them, particularly if you are the Home Secretary. So I think she's got this wrong, and she needs to maybe reflect on her own behaviour.
Here's a tricky one for you. We've just had Dal Babu, I don't know if you heard him, former Chief Superintendent with the Met Police, on the programme. He says she gets away with stuff because she's a brown woman, and if she was a white woman or a white man, she wouldn't.
Well, look, I wouldn't want to get into that. I think you judge everyone on what they've said, their own behaviour, their own activity as a politician, and just looking at what she does and what she says, there is no doubt that Suella Braverman is out of control, that her behaviour is irresponsible. I think the issue about getting away with it, as you say, well, look, the Prime Minister is accountable for the whole... Exactly, absolutely. The Prime Minister is responsible for all of his government. If he cannot sack someone, if he hasn't agreed to this statement going out, that's about his political weakness, not about the Home Secretary and whatever criteria or whatever background she's brought into this argument. It's about the Prime Minister, and we have to find that out today.
You know what I'm going to ask you next. Please answer me honestly. Should the Prime Minister sack her?
Yes, of course. Unless he has signed off on these views, unless they are his views. So
the Home Secretary should be sacked by the Prime Minister today?
Well, unless she's simply representing his view. I mean, if they won't tell us that, it may well be the case, though I would imagine if he had signed off on that statement, he would have found it quite easy to tell you and me this morning, so we would know that. But if you have a Home Secretary that is so out of control, so divisive, so inflammatory, undermining the police and therefore the national security and safety of the public, that's not someone who should be Home Secretary.
So you should sack her, in your opinion. Would you take part in the marches on Saturday?
Would I take part? Well, I wouldn't, because I don't agree with, I think, the sentiment that drives those, but I don't think any march, you know, it's not whether a politician agrees with it. The fact is that people will have dissenting views and should have the right to protest. We are fundamentally this weekend celebrating freedom, the freedom we had to fight for as a country, our grandparents had to fight for. And therefore, I think where you can balance the competing activities, competing needs that people have, and the police say they can do that, I would back their operational independence. I myself would not go on that protest, because I would worry about some of the activities and things we've seen and said at some of those in the past, though I accept the majority of people on all of those protests are simply expressing a very human and real desire for an end to human suffering and tragedy.
Some of your colleagues would go on those marches. What advice are they given by the party? Well,
our advice is to not go on those marches, and that's not to disrespect the genuine feelings the majority of people will have on a march like that. You will know, because you've had to report on it. We have seen at some of those marches, you know, things which from a minority of people have
minority,
but they've glorified, you know, violence. We saw people with paraglider badges on.
We saw two people, and they've been charged.
We saw statements, yes, but you will understand. I think the public will understand. We would not in any way want to be associated with that, and as unfair as it is, where that minority of people are, I think, undermining the wider message, the wider support that people on that march have. We've got to be very sensitive about that.
OK, talk to me about energy bills. It is obviously we're heading in towards winter again. It was flipping freezing in my flat last night, let me tell you. You want to bring them down by up to £1,400 by 2030. What about until then? What happens then?
Well, look, first of all, the argument we're making today, this is the debate in the House of Commons around the King's speech, is that where we've been so exposed and vulnerable as a country, it is to that spike in fossil fuel prices, particularly it's not just the gas price to heat your home, it's electricity price as well, because obviously that's set by the price of gas. The real thing this country needs is to never be so vulnerable again. And that's the difference between our position and the Conservative position with the King's speech promoting more oil and gas licensing. We'll never bring down bills in the long term about that. Now, in terms of the short-term position, as you say, look, there is a very challenging financial position facing this country. We need to perhaps learn more in 2 weeks' time in the autumn statement as to how inflation has infected those spending plans and the tax receipts that we have got in. So I can't commit to any specific support today around that. But I think it's very, very important to get across this message to the public that we can chart a path which never again leaves us so vulnerable to the kind of pressures we saw last year and still exist into this year. But we can't do it if we follow the government's plan.
I like to think that one of my skills is reading people's body language. And over the last 6 months or so, you guys are more and more confident when you come in. You think you're going to win the election?
We take nothing for granted.
I knew you were going to say, I could have written that for you.
Let's be frank. You know electoral history. No government has ever come in
Are you all right?
with the kind of swing that, you know, if you lose in the style we did in 2019. No one's ever really done that before in one leap. But we are very, very confident that we have been able to change the Labour Party. It's unrecognisable to the party that lost in 2019. We've had to have the humility, not easy for politicians always, to understand why we lost so badly. And because we've done that, Keir Starmer's leadership has been a central part of that. Clearly, what we've seen in the by-elections in the last few months is that the Labour Party is competitive in all parts of the country. So we're not complacent.
Can't read anything in by-elections, though.
Well, no, but there are places that we have won.
Even I know that.
There are places that we have won, which I think no one would really ever expect Labour to hold in the House of Commons, and the kind of swings that we've seen. Look, so we're not taking that for granted, but we do take seriously the need to prepare, because I think we've seen in many different people, different politics over the last few years, Boris Johnson, Nicola Sturgeon, people who've won elections, have they delivered on what they wanted to deliver? No, they haven't. So we take seriously the position that we're in, but we take nothing for granted.